We need a real pilot, not some girl, the SEAL laughed. Sarah's heart sank, another day proving herself. But when Commander Peterson heard her call sign Falcon, his eyes widened. You're the pilot who saved my brother in Syria. Everything changed. Tonight she'd show them what real courage looks like. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning sun painted the military base in golden light. Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of the runway, her heart beating fast like a drum. Today was different from all the other days. Today she would prove herself to people who didn't believe in her. Sarah was 28 years old. She had short brown hair and bright green eyes that showed determination. She was not very tall, only 5 feet 4 inches, but she stood straight and proud like a soldier should. Where's the pilot? Colonel Harrison asked, looking around the hangar with confusion. His voice was rough and deep, like someone who had shouted orders for 30 years in the military. Right here, sir, Sarah said, stepping forward with confidence. The colonel's eyes went wide with surprise. Around them, 20 Navy SEALs stopped talking and stared at her. The hangar became so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Sarah was used to this look of shock. She had seen it 100 times before in her career. You? One of the SEALs laughed loudly. They sent us a girl to fly us into combat? Sarah's hands made tight fists and her jaw clenched, but she kept her voice calm and professional. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. I'll be flying you into enemy territory today, gentlemen. The SEAL who laughed was big and muscular with dark hair and a thick mustache. His name tag said Rodriguez. He shook his head from side to side like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. This has to be a joke, right? We need someone who can handle real combat flying, not someone who looks like she should be serving coffee. I can handle anything you throw at me, Sarah said quietly, but her voice was strong like steel. The other SEALs started whispering to each other. Some looked worried. Others looked angry. A few just stared at Sarah like she was some strange creature they had never seen before. Commander Jake Storm Peterson stepped out from behind the large military aircraft. He was the team leader and everyone respected him because he was smart and brave. He had gray hair at his temples and scars on his hands from many battles. His face was serious as he looked at Sarah with careful eyes. Ma'am, I need to be honest with you, he said in a respectful but concerned voice. This mission is extremely dangerous. We're going deep into hostile enemy territory where people want to kill us. The enemy will try to shoot us down with rockets and bullets. They have new weapons that can destroy aircraft from far away. Are you absolutely sure you're ready for this kind of action? Sarah looked directly into his eyes without blinking. I've been ready my whole life, Commander. This is what I trained for. The truth was, Sarah had dreamed of this moment since she was 5 years old and saw her first military helicopter. Her father had been a pilot too, and a very good one. He died in a terrible crash when his plane went down during a dangerous rescue mission to save trapped soldiers. Sarah was only 8 years old then, but she made a serious promise to herself that day. She would learn to fly like him. She would save lives like him. She would make him proud even though he wasn't there to see it. Listen, lady, Rodriguez said, stepping closer to Sarah with his arms crossed. No offense to you personally, but we've lost good men, real warriors, because of pilots who couldn't handle the pressure when bullets started flying. We need someone we can trust completely with our lives, not someone who might panic when things get scary. You can trust me with your lives, Sarah said firmly. Her voice was steady and confident, but inside her heart was breaking a little bit. She had heard these same cruel words so many times before. In flight school, other male pilots said she was too small and too weak to fly military aircraft. When she graduated at the very top of her class with perfect scores, they said she was just lucky and the instructors went easy on her. When she completed her first combat mission successfully without any problems, they said it was an easy mission that anyone could have done. Nothing she ever did was good enough for them. No matter how hard she worked or how well she performed, there was always someone ready to say she didn't belong there. Commander Peterson studied her face carefully for a long moment. There was something in his experienced eyes that looked different from the other men. It wasn't doubt or disrespect like the others showed. It was curiosity and maybe a little bit of hope. What's your call sign, Lieutenant? He asked in a serious voice. Falcon, sir. Peterson's eyebrows went up in surprise, and his mouth opened a little. Falcon? As in, the pilot who saved those American hostages in Syria last year during that terrible storm. Sarah nodded once. Yes, sir. That was me. The entire hangar went completely silent. You could have heard a mouse walking across the floor. Every single SEAL turned to look at her with completely new eyes, like they were seeing her for the first time. That was you. Rodriguez whispered in shock, his voice much softer now. "You're the pilot who flew through that horrible storm and enemy gunfire to save our guys when everyone else said it was impossible?" "It was my job to bring them home safely," Sarah said simply, like it was no big deal. But it had been much more than just a job to her. That terrible night in Syria would stay in her memory forever. Sarah had flown through the worst weather conditions of her entire life. Lightning bolts lit up the dark sky like giant fireworks that could kill you. Heavy rain hit the aircraft windscreen so hard she could barely see anything in front of her. Enemy soldiers on the ground shot machine guns and rockets at her plane, trying to bring her down in flames. Inside the aircraft that night, 5 American hostages sat with their hands tied behind their backs, looking scared and hopeless. They had been prisoners in enemy hands for 3 long months. They were thin and weak and had cuts and bruises on their faces. Sarah knew their families back home were waiting and praying every day for them to come back alive. When the helicopter engine started making terrible grinding noises that meant serious trouble, Sarah could have turned around and flown back to safety. It would have been the smart thing to do, the safe choice that would keep her alive. Her commanding officers would have understood. No one would have blamed her. But she looked at those 5 hostages with their sad, hopeful eyes, and she saw her father's face in her mind. She heard his strong voice telling her the same thing he always said: sometimes being truly brave means being scared to death and doing the right thing anyway. So she kept flying forward into the danger. She dodged rockets that exploded like orange flowers in the dark sky. She flew the helicopter so low that tree branches scratched and hit the bottom of the aircraft. When they finally landed safely at the American base, Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn off the engine controls. But all 5 hostages went home alive to hug their families again. Now, standing in this hangar, Commander Peterson walked slowly closer to Sarah. His voice became quiet and personal so only she could hear what he was saying. "My younger brother Tommy was one of those hostages you saved," he said with emotion in his voice. "Because of your courage and skill, he got to see his baby daughter's first birthday party. He got to hold his wife again. You gave my family a miracle that night." Sarah felt warm tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She didn't want to cry in front of these tough soldiers. Peterson turned around to face his team of SEALs. "Listen up, everyone," he shouted in his commanding voice. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, call sign Falcon. She's not just any pilot. She's the best combat pilot I've ever met in 20 years of military service. If she says she can get us to the target and bring us back home alive, then you can bet your life that she can do exactly that." Rodriguez looked embarrassed and ashamed of his earlier words. His face turned red as he stepped forward. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for what I said before. I was completely wrong and disrespectful. I didn't know who you were or what you had accomplished." "It's perfectly okay," Sarah said with understanding in her voice. "I completely understand your concern for your team's safety. You want to make sure everyone comes home alive. That's exactly what good soldiers should do, look out for each other." The mission briefing began in a small room with maps on the walls. They were going to rescue a captured CIA intelligence agent from a heavily guarded prison camp deep inside enemy territory. The camp was surrounded by tall, dangerous mountains and several enemy military bases full of soldiers who wanted to kill Americans. "The weather report shows severe thunderstorms moving into the area," Colonel Harrison said seriously, pointing at the detailed map with his finger. "Visibility will be near zero, which means you won't be able to see where you're flying. The enemy has new anti-aircraft weapons that can shoot down helicopters from many miles away. This mission is extremely dangerous, and there's a good chance some of you might not come back alive." Sarah studied the map very carefully, memorizing every mountain, every valley, every enemy position. She had flown in terrible weather before, but this looked much worse than the Syria mission. The mountains were incredibly tall and sharp like giant knives pointing at the sky. One wrong turn could crash them into a solid rock wall and kill everyone instantly. "How many enemy fighter aircraft should we expect to attack us?" she asked. "Intelligence reports say at least 20 enemy fighters in the area," Peterson answered grimly. "They'll come after us with everything they have as soon as they discover we're there. We'll be outnumbered and deep in their territory." Sarah nodded seriously. "Then we'll have to be faster and smarter than they are." As the SEALs spent time preparing their weapons and combat gear, Sarah walked slowly around her aircraft in the hangar. It was an MH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, painted dark green and black to blend in with the night. She carefully checked every bolt, every wire, every single part that could break and kill them all. Her father had taught her this important ritual when she was just a little girl. "A pilot is only as good as her aircraft," he used to say while teaching her about flying. Take care of your bird like she's family, and she'll take care of you when your life depends on it. Sarah placed her hand gently on the helicopter's metal side like she was petting a horse. Come on, girl, she whispered softly. We have important work to do tonight. Don't let me down. 2 hours later, they were flying over the dark ocean toward enemy territory. The SEALs sat quietly in the back of the helicopter, checking their weapons and equipment one final time. Sarah concentrated on flying, but she could feel their eyes watching her every move. She knew exactly what they were thinking because she had seen those thoughts before. They were wondering if she would panic and freeze up when the enemy started shooting at them. They were wondering if she was physically strong enough to handle the heavy flight controls when bullets hit the aircraft and made it hard to fly. They were wondering if they would all die tonight because their pilot was a woman who couldn't do a man's job. Sarah had wondered the same terrible things about herself when she first started flying dangerous combat missions. The doubt ate at her like a disease. But she learned something very important through experience. Real courage isn't about never feeling afraid. True courage is about being scared to death and still doing your job anyway. The severe thunderstorms hit them hard when they were still 50 miles away from their target. Rain poured down from the black sky like waterfalls. Violent wind shook the helicopter like it was a small toy in the hands of an angry giant. Lightning flashed so bright and close that it hurt their eyes to look at it. Can you handle flying in this weather? Peterson asked over the radio, his voice showing concern. I've got everything under control, Sarah replied calmly, but inside she was gripping the flight controls so tightly her knuckles were white. The helicopter bounced up and down and rolled from side to side in the violent storm. In the back, one of the tough SEALs looked green and sick to his stomach. Another SEAL was praying quietly to God for their safety. But Sarah kept flying forward through the dangerous weather. She thought about her father again and remembered a day when she was 12 years old. He had taken her flying in his small personal airplane during a bad thunderstorm. She was terrified and wanted to go back, but he stayed completely calm and confident. Don't look at the scary storm outside, he had told her in his patient voice. Look at your instruments and trust your training. The instruments will tell you the truth even when your eyes and feelings lie to you. Now, 16 years later, Sarah followed her father's wise advice exactly. She watched the glowing instruments on the control panel and trusted everything she had learned in flight school. They made it through the violent storm just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. Below them, the enemy territory looked dark and dangerous like something from a nightmare. Sarah flew the helicopter very low, following the twisting valleys between the mountains to avoid being detected by enemy radar systems. 5 minutes until we reached the target, she announced to the team. The SEALs got ready for combat. They checked their rappelling ropes and put on their night vision goggles that would let them see in the dark. Peterson moved up to sit directly behind Sarah so they could talk. When we get to the prison camp, how long can you wait for us? He asked. As long as you need me to wait, Sarah said without hesitation. I'll keep the engines running and be ready to take off the second you get back. If enemy fighter aircraft show up while we're inside the prison, you take off immediately without us. That's a direct order from your commanding officer. Sarah turned around to look directly at Peterson. No, sir, with all due respect. We all go home together tonight or nobody goes home. I don't leave people behind. Peterson smiled for the first time that day. You really are the famous Falcon, aren't you? The enemy prison camp appeared ahead of them through the darkness, lit up by powerful searchlights that swept back and forth looking for intruders. Sarah could see tall guard towers with armed soldiers and enemy troops walking around the compound carrying machine guns. It looked like a place where hope came to die. There it is, Peterson pointed with his finger. That concrete building in the center of the camp. Our CIA agent is being held prisoner on the second floor in a small cell. Sarah found a clear area behind some thick trees where she could land the helicopter safely. The aircraft touched down on the ground as softly as a feather, and the SEALs jumped out quickly and quietly. They disappeared into the darkness like deadly shadows, moving toward the prison camp. Sarah waited alone in the cockpit, her hands ready on the flight controls. The engines hummed quietly like sleeping cats. Through her night vision goggles, everything looked green and ghostly. She watched carefully for any sign of enemy movement. Every few minutes, she heard the distant sound of gunshots echoing through the mountains. 20 long minutes passed slowly. Then 30. Then 40. Sarah started to worry that something had gone very wrong. Suddenly, her radio crackled with Peterson's voice. Falcon, this is Storm. We have the package and he's alive, but we're in serious trouble. Half the prison camp is chasing us with guns and they've called for backup from the main base. I'm ready and waiting for you, Sarah replied immediately. Negative, Falcon. Enemy fighter aircraft are coming fast from the north. You need to leave right now while you still can. Not without you and your team. That's a direct order, Lieutenant. Sarah looked up at the dark sky and saw moving lights in the distance, enemy aircraft flying toward them at high speed. In just a few minutes, this peaceful valley would be full of bullets and exploding rockets. But she thought about her father's last mission years ago. He had gone to rescue soldiers who were trapped behind enemy lines with no way out. When enemy fighters attacked his plane, he could have escaped easily by himself. Instead, he stayed to fight and make sure all the trapped soldiers got out safely first. He died that day, but 12 men went home to their families because of his sacrifice. "Storm, this is Falcon," Sarah said into her radio with determination. "I'm staying right here. You and your team better move your asses and get back here fast." She saw bright muzzle flashes in the dark trees as the SEALs fought a running gun battle with enemy soldiers. Behind them, dozens of enemy troops were running and shooting, trying to kill the Americans. The first enemy fighter jet appeared overhead like a hunting hawk. Sarah saw it turning toward them in a wide circle, getting ready to attack with rockets and machine guns. Come on," she whispered urgently, watching the tree line for her team. Finally, the SEALs burst out of the forest, half carrying an injured man between them. It was the CIA agent they had come to rescue. He looked hurt and weak, but he was alive and conscious. Go, go, go!" Peterson shouted as his men jumped into the helicopter. But the enemy fighter was already diving toward them from above. Sarah could see the pilot's face in the cockpit through his helmet visor. He was young, probably scared just like she was. Sarah pulled the helicopter up into the air just as rockets exploded exactly where they had been sitting 2 seconds before. The aircraft shook violently from the blast, and pieces of metal flew everywhere, but the helicopter kept flying. "Hold on tight, everyone," Sarah shouted over the noise. She flew the helicopter between the tall mountains, using them as cover from the enemy fighters that were chasing them. Behind them, more aircraft were joining the deadly chase. Sarah counted 6 enemy fighters, all trying to shoot them down. "We've got a lot of company back here," Rodriguez called out, looking out the back window with his weapon ready. "I see them," Sarah said calmly. She pushed the helicopter to fly faster, but it wasn't fast enough. The sleek enemy fighters were gaining on them quickly. That's when Sarah made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of running away from the dangerous mountains, she turned the helicopter directly toward them. "What the hell are you doing?" Peterson asked in alarm. "Trust me," Sarah said with confidence she didn't completely feel. She flew straight toward the tallest, most dangerous mountain peak, so close that the SEALs could see individual rocks and cracks on the cliff face rushing past them. The enemy fighters followed them into the narrow valley, but they had to fly in single file because the space was so tight. Sarah knew these mountains perfectly from studying the maps for hours. She knew there was a sharp, hidden turn ahead that the enemy pilots couldn't see yet because of the mountain walls. At the very last second, when it looked like they would crash into solid rock, Sarah yanked the helicopter hard to the right. They flew through a narrow gap between 2 mountain peaks that was barely wide enough for their aircraft. The first enemy fighter tried desperately to follow them through the gap. He turned too late and too sharply. Sarah didn't look back, but she heard the terrible explosion as the enemy plane crashed into the mountain. The other enemy fighters were more careful now. They stayed back at a safer distance, but they kept following the helicopter. Sarah knew she had to do something else creative or they would never make it home alive. She remembered something important her father had taught her about flying in mountainous terrain. Sometimes, when you can't go around or through, he had said, the best way out is straight up. Sarah pulled the helicopter into a steep climb, going straight up as fast as the aircraft could manage. The SEALs were pressed back hard in their seats by the force. The injured CIA agent groaned in pain but held on. "What are you doing now?" Peterson asked, his voice tight with worry. "Flying into that storm," Sarah said, pointing at the black thunderclouds above them that crackled with lightning. "Are you completely crazy? We'll get torn apart by the wind." "Maybe we will," Sarah admitted. "But if we stay down here with those fighters, we're definitely going to die." Sarah flew the helicopter straight up into the heart of the violent storm clouds. Immediately, everything went completely dark except for the brief flashes of lightning. The aircraft bounced and rolled like a small boat in rough ocean waves. Hail the size of golf balls hit the windscreen. The engines made strange, frightening noises. But the enemy fighters couldn't follow them into the storm. They didn't have the same specialized training for extreme weather flying that Sarah had received. For 10 terrifying minutes, Sarah fought to keep the helicopter flying and under control. Rain poured in through a window that had been cracked by the hail. The engines sputtered and coughed. One of the SEALs was violently sick all over the floor. The helicopter spun and twisted like a leaf in a tornado. But when they finally came out of the storm clouds on the other side, they were completely alone. The enemy fighters were nowhere to be seen. "You actually did it," Peterson said, his voice full of amazement and respect. "We did it," Sarah corrected him. "We're a team and teams win together." The long flight back to their base was mostly quiet. The rescued CIA agents slept peacefully for the first time in months, finally safe. The SEALs cleaned their weapons and talked quietly about the successful mission and how close they had come to dying. Rodriguez came up to sit near Sarah in the cockpit. "Ma'am, I owe you a big apology and my sincere thanks. I was completely wrong about you from the beginning." "Don't worry about it," Sarah said generously. "You were just trying to protect your team. I respect that." "No, it was more than just that," Rodriguez said honestly. "I was scared and prejudiced. I was afraid that a woman couldn't do this job as well as a man. That was stupid and unfair of me, and I'm ashamed of my attitude." Sarah looked at him with understanding. "You know what? I was scared too. I was scared that maybe you were right. I was terrified that I would let everyone down and get good people killed. But you didn't let us down. You saved all our lives tonight. We saved each other. That's how good teams work." When they landed at the base several hours later, Colonel Harrison was waiting for them on the runway. So were newspaper reporters, television cameras, and important officers from Washington, D.C. The rescued CIA agent was immediately taken to the base hospital, but the doctors said he would make a full recovery. Peterson walked up to Sarah as she shut down the helicopter engines for the final time that night. "That was some of the best flying I've ever seen in my entire military career," he said with genuine admiration. "Thank you, Commander. That means a lot coming from you. I have an important question for you, Lieutenant." "Yes, sir?" Peterson smiled warmly. "My team has another dangerous mission scheduled for next month. It's going to be just as risky as this one was. Would you be interested in flying us again?" Sarah looked at the helicopter that had carried them safely through hell and back. Then she looked at the SEALs who were unloading their gear and talking excitedly about the mission. Rodriguez waved at her with a big smile. Another SEAL gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up. "I'd be honored to fly with you again, sir," she said without hesitation. That night, Sarah called her mother from her small quarters on the base. "Hi, Mom." "Sarah. I saw the news on television. They said you rescued someone today and flew through a terrible storm." "We rescued someone as a team," Sarah said. "It wasn't just me. Everyone did their part." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Your father would be so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart." Sarah felt tears coming to her eyes again. "I really hope so, Mom. I know so for certain. You're exactly the kind of pilot he knew you would become when you were just a little girl dreaming of flying." After the emotional phone call, Sarah sat on her narrow military bed and looked at a framed picture of her father. He was standing next to his aircraft, smiling broadly and giving a confident thumbs up to the camera. He looked so young and full of life and hope. "I did it, Dad," she whispered to the photograph. "I finally proved that I belong here with the best pilots in the world." But even as she said those words, Sarah knew in her heart that this was just the beginning of her journey. There would be many other missions, other challenges, other people who would doubt her abilities simply because she was a woman in a man's profession. That was perfectly okay with her. She was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, Sarah was walking to the flight line to check on her helicopter when she heard someone call her name. "Hey, Falcon." She turned around and saw Rodriguez jogging to catch up with her, a big smile on his face. "The guys and I were talking last night," he said when he reached her. "We want you to know something important. We'd rather fly into combat with you than with any other pilot in the entire military." "Even though I'm a woman?" Sarah asked with a slight smile. Rodriguez shook his head firmly. "Not despite that fact. Because of who you are as a person and a pilot. Because you're brave and skilled and you truly care about getting all of us home safely to our families. That's all that really matters in this job." Sarah felt her heart warm with gratitude. "Thank you so much. That means everything to me." As she continued walking toward her helicopter, Sarah thought about all the little girls around the world who might become military pilots someday. She hoped they would have an easier time than she had experienced. She hoped people would judge them fairly by their skills and character, not by their gender. But if those future female pilots did face doubt and discrimination like she had, Sarah hoped they would remember her story. She hoped they would know that with enough courage, determination, and hard work, they could prove everyone wrong and earn their rightful place among the best. Sarah climbed into her helicopter and started the powerful engines. Another mission was waiting somewhere. Another chance to show that a woman could fly just as well as any man. Another opportunity to save lives and serve her country. Another chance to soar as Falcon. The morning sun was rising over the military base, painting everything in beautiful golden light. Sarah taxied her aircraft to the runway and prepared for takeoff on whatever adventure waited ahead. "Tower, this is Falcon requesting permission to take off," she said professionally into her radio. "Permission granted, Falcon. Fly safe out there." Sarah pulled back on the flight controls, and the helicopter rose smoothly into the clear morning sky. Below her, the world looked peaceful and beautiful and full of possibilities. She thought about her father one final time. He had taught her to fly with skill and precision. He had taught her to be brave when others were counting on her. Most importantly, he had taught her that the very best pilots aren't the ones who never feel afraid. The truly great pilots are the ones who feel afraid and fly anyway because people's lives depend on them. Sarah was afraid every single time she flew into combat. She was afraid of crashing and dying. She was afraid of letting her team down when they needed her most. She was afraid of not being good enough when the stakes were highest. But she flew anyway every time because that was her job and her calling. That's exactly what made her Falcon. As the helicopter climbed higher into the endless blue sky, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez smiled with quiet confidence. She was exactly where she belonged in life, flying dangerous missions and saving lives, just like her heroic father before her. And somewhere in heaven she knew he was watching and smiling with pride too. The radio crackled with her next mission orders. Sarah listened carefully to every word and set course for her new destination with steady hands and a brave heart. There were people somewhere who needed rescuing. There was important, dangerous work to be done. And Falcon was ready to fly into whatever storm was waiting. This story celebrates the courage and determination it takes to break barriers and prove yourself in any field. Sarah's journey.